So let's talk about the stimulus hearing now, because this is the big one, right? We had Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell quarantined. They were doing this virtually. We had Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin also on his own, not doing all of this virtually, talking to the Senate Banking Committee yesterday. And there's a couple of things at play, which we'll get to. Really, two different sides to this coin. There were two different messages that emerged. I covered some of it earlier when I was talking about the new stimulus. On the one side, you have the White House and the Treasury Secretary, Stephen Mnuchin, with this sort of wait and see approach. Wait and see. What I find interesting about this wait and see approach is that what they're saying is, and I didn't know this until yesterday, but $1 trillion has not been spent yet out of the money that's been outlaid from the stimulus packages. Why not? So I get Secretary Mnuchin's idea that we want to wait and see how this money trickles down to people. How does it get spent? They have $1 trillion waiting there in unemployment benefits and other aid packages right now that's not being spent. Again, why not? So I want to go through some of this. The PPP. Many people frustrated that they have not been able to get their loans approved. A lot of people have been trying to get their loans, like small businesses have been trying to get this PPP money distributed. They're trying to work with their banks, getting on the phone with Wells Fargo telling them that, we're sorry for the delays. Other big banks having the same issues. So getting this money out has been a huge problem. There's been a lot of confusion from the banks, from the Treasury Department. So, you can only really blame them for this mass confusion. And again, I come back to these different models, right? Australia, Canada, they had one singular model that was able to protect employment, get money out to their citizens, shore up businesses, and they did it in one way. America did it like this hodgepodge of loans and grants and this and that, and PPP over here, and CARES Act over here, and it was this like weird mesh that we know now has not worked. So that's where Treasury Secretary Mnuchin saying we want to wait and see, because he says the majority of the original CARES Act money has not been released yet. A majority of it, over $1 trillion. So I know more than 30 million of you are still waiting for your payment. I saw one woman today say, I'm on SSDI. I've had this bank account set up for 10 years, and I still haven't received my stimulus check yet. Why? That was supposed to be the easy ones. Direct deposits, easy. But I understand this sort of wait and see now a little bit better, because what they're saying is the money hasn't even gone out yet. So we want to wait and see how it affects people. Okay. I'm not being terribly, sympathetic, but I get it now in a way that I didn't before. So, it's not like all this money has dried up. It's all still there. Also, people trying to get their unemployment, that additional $600 a week from the federal government, that money in large part is still there, and people waiting for those additional payments. Why? This is a failure of leadership. This is a failure at the Treasury to get this money out there. Congress gave you the authority to do it. Why hasn't it not been spent? So, and also we found out yesterday that they are refinancing a large amount of money. That the federal government right now, the Treasury Secretary, they are refinancing a huge amount of debt so that they can get a better rate, so that they can borrow more and provide and take on more debt right now. But the issue is, and I didn't know this, that the only country that wants to lend us another $1 trillion is China. And how much we're already incredibly beholden to China with massive trade deficits and other things to China. How much more debt do we want to take on from China? Another $1 trillion from them? But that's the reality we're facing. So I can understand, again, they're wanting to slow down a little bit. That makes more sense to me now. I'm not saying I agree with it. I'm just saying it makes more sense to me now. Let me know in the comments what you think about this wait and see approach. And then on the other side of it is the argument from Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, who said in not so many words, even though Congress tried to push him on this, I think we need more money into the hands of the American people, basically, and was really calling on Congress. He says it's up to Congress It's up to Congress to get a stimulus out to the American people. And I believe what he's calling for is that 3 to 6 month payment into the hands of the American people, although he wouldn't come out and specifically say that yesterday. Again, he was very measured in his response, but we've heard him say it a couple of times this past week. It's up to Congress, get more payments out now. So this back and forth was interesting. Here is, I want to play a little bit of sound right now, this back and forth between Jerome Powell and Stephen Mnuchin, so you can see the different responses. Take a listen.
What Congress has done to date has been remarkably timely and forceful.
There are scenarios within Main Street where we could lose all of our capital, and we're prepared to do that.
I wanted to call out a risk there, which was the risk of longer-term damage to the economy.
There is the risk of permanent damage, and as I've said before, we're conscious of the health issues.
What's unusual about this is it's all about the service sector, and particularly those parts of the service sector that are where there are lots and lots of in-person contact.
We don't intend to send anybody back to work without the protections, and I would say I was prepared to come there today. I thought it was safe to testify.
I do think we need to take a step back and ask, over time, is it enough? And we need to be prepared to act further, and I would say we are if the need is there.
So that's a little back and forth and some highlights yesterday. Things got a little testy, though. There were some moments of testiness, which I'll play for you now. And that occurred a couple of different times from some different senators on the banking committee. Because, look, the White House wants us to reopen, right? Want us to get back to work. But Senate concerned at what risk? At what risk is this reopening? Will it help or hurt us in the long run if workers go back and get sick and carry this virus back home, or, people die as a result of it? So here was some of that from yesterday. Take a listen to members of Congress pushing Secretary Mnuchin on this getting back to work.
Secretary Mnuchin, you said there's considerable risk of not reopening, that keeping some businesses closed could cause permanent economic damage. How many workers will die if we send people back to work without the protections they need, Mr. Secretary?
Mr. Senator, we don't intend to send anybody back to work without the protections, and I would say I was prepared to come there today. I thought it was safe to testify. Matter of fact, I already was at the Senate this morning wearing a mask. And I assure you, both myself and everybody on the task force, the vice president and others, are following the best medical advice. And I couldn't be more proud of the medical advice that we're getting and the way the economy is opening up in a safe way.
The longer that we continue a shutdown, when weeks turn into months, doesn't that necessarily increase the risk that some businesses will fail, some jobs won't be there to go back to if a lockdown and a shutdown continues indefinitely?
That's absolutely the case, Mr. Senator. There is the risk of permanent damage. And as I've said before, we're conscious of the health issues, and we want to do this in a balanced and safe way.
We want to do this in a balanced and safe way. Do you think that they're doing that right now? I'm asking you to weigh in the comments. Do you think that we are, getting back to work in a balanced and measured way? Let me know. What has your experience been from your employers? What are you hearing from, people in your town? What are you seeing from a reopening perspective? And is this the best approach to getting us back, in this third quarter? So Treasury Secretary Mnuchin thought that in the third quarter of this year, we would really see like a V-shaped recovery. Other members of the Fed, though, who were on the Senate Banking Committee call, said that they didn't think that that was going to happen. It's hard to say, but many of what the data points that we've seen so far pointed out that there is more action needs to be taken right now. So we can get back to work. But I showed you the pictures yesterday of a mall reopened, and people are scared to go to the mall. Restaurants are reopened. They're operating at 25% capacity. So people are scared to go back into that environment just yet. It's not as if you flip a switch and everyone's back out on the streets, everyone's back out at the malls, everyone's shopping, everyone's buying, everything's okay. People lost their jobs. Upwards of 40 million people out of work right now. They're not going to be going out buying a Nintendo. They're not going to be splurging on date nights. That's the reality. And so that's why I believe when Fed Chair Jerome Powell says an infusion of money into the hands of the American people, that action needs to be taken swiftly. Otherwise, the U.S. will not fully recover from this lockdown until the end of 2021, they're predicting. So yes, reopen in a measured way, but be very cautious about it and be very smart. Otherwise, we're going to have relapses. We're going to see what other countries have been going through right now. They opened and they had to close again. We're seeing spikes in cases in different parts of Texas and Minnesota and other places like that. So be very cautious about this. We'll get to the reopening here in a moment. But there was some other testy moments yesterday from between Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin and Elizabeth Warren. Now, this is important because it relates back to what we were talking about earlier on these PPP loans. Now, Congress at the end of March passed, this Paycheck Protection Program, part of the CARES Act, all of it tied together, but again, this hodgepodge of different programs. And Congress gave them the authority to make sure that money was getting out to businesses that needed it, right? To protect the payroll of those people who are going to lose their jobs. The problem, though, is that it's like a gentleman's agreement from the Treasury Department to these businesses to basically say we're going to keep employment or going to keep people on payroll. So this is very important because there's no sort of line in the bill or in this loan program that says if you do not, you're going to have to give it all back, you're going to be audited, you're going to be thrown in jail. There's nothing like that. So it's basically just a handshake and a wink wink. And the Treasury Secretary had to take some fire on this exact point from Senator Elizabeth Warren yesterday. Take a listen to this. I think this is a fascinating exchange.
I'm sorry, Secretary Mnuchin, that's not quite right. What the law specifically does is gives you the specific authority to determine the terms on which these loans are made and who's going to be able to get them for these mid-sized and giant corporations. And so I had a very simple question for you. You say the economy is going to recover. It's going to take jobs in order for that to happen. So what I want to know is, are you going to require companies that receive money from this $500 billion slush fund to have to keep people on payroll? It's a simple question, yes or no. Are you going to require that?
First, let me say that our number one objective is keeping people employed.
Good. So are you going to
I want to be very clear on that.
People who are getting taxpayer money? That's my question.
Again, we negotiated very significant restrictions on employee compensation, on dividends, on buybacks, and in the Main Street facility, we have put in a provision that we expect people to use their best efforts to support jobs. But Chairman Powell?
I'm sorry. I have very limited time here, Mr. Secretary. Let me understand what you're saying. In all the facilities that are not the Main Street facility, you're not putting in any requirement for payroll. And the Main Street facility is something about commercial reasonable effort to be able to maintain jobs. In other words, if a corporation fires a bunch of people, then gets federal taxpayer money, you're fine with that. Or if they take a bunch of federal taxpayer money and then say, well, it didn't work out commercially for us, then they can fire people.
So that's the big problem. The idea that, well, we tried to not have to fire the person. Oh, you tried? Okay, good, that's it. So that's the concern from Congress. I agree with that line of questioning. The whole point of this program, taxpayer money being used to make sure that these people aren't losing their jobs. And are you going to trust those big corporations to basically say, yeah, we really tried. We tried to not. There's going to be lawsuits because you're going to know there's going to be workers that are going to say, you didn't try, you fired me. You didn't try. If you got loan money and you could have kept me on the payroll, why didn't you tell me that? Or why didn't you try harder? And so there's really, it's a real shady gray area here, at least in this new stimulus plan that I was talking about just a few minutes ago from Congresswoman Powell. There are specific restrictions in this thing. And as she points out in her bill, that would protect against fraud and other outlays of money, overpayments, abuse, fraud, etc. So again, this first round of stimulus, the way that it was designed, is a hodgepodge, it was a total mess. And then you have this line of questioning right now from Senator Warren as to why it's being misused. So let me know in the comments your thoughts on that.